Every good day starts with a good walk. Through here, Albie, round, through here. There we go, good boy. Winter definitely feels like it's here. Bye, Mum. Right, so you might have noticed I've got the Oakleys back on, and I had to get some new lenses because I scuffed the previous ones. Rather annoyingly, I don't really like the colour of these lenses. They're just cheap sort of knockoff lenses, but I probably should just get some other coloured lenses. My car keeps complaining about having a front passenger side window open. Looks like a closed window to me. So I've got another one of those busy days where I'm going to have to rush around a little bit. And I'm going to shoot a video as I go. It's going to be one of those space-based videos. Hang on a minute. So today I thought what I'd do is gaze into my crystal ball and try to predict where Starship is going in the short, medium and long term. But first I need to get onto the road and get cracking because I got somewhere to be. One day I'll explain what's been going on in my private life, but at the moment, not quite ready. So, as I said, today is a little bit of an exercise in crystal ball gazing. Therefore, everything I say should be taken with a grain of salt. In the near term, with Starship, obviously the very first thing we can expect to see is an orbital test flight. And Elon Musk is saying that that's looking like it's probably going to be a January test flight now, with approval by the end of the year, hopefully from the FAA. It's very exciting, but this is very much a test. This is not going to carry any kind of a payload. There's not going to be any attempt to recover the first or second stage. It is purely a case of, can we stack the thing, can we fuel it, and can we get it off the launch pad? Those are the main things they want to see. And then once they've done that, they would also quite like to know how much of the heat shield survives. Does the separation event actually work as they've planned? And ultimately, does the first stage re-enter successfully? And does the second stage re-enter successfully? And those are the real stretch goals. I think if it actually does a soft touchdown in the ocean, either of these two stages, I think SpaceX will be incredibly pleased and surprised. To be honest, I think Elon Musk would accept it as a win if the rocket just gets off the pad without destroying what he likes to term stage 0, the actual launch pad and facilities. Let's hope that doesn't happen, of course, because that would set them back a fair way. I mean, after all, they've just spent the last 6 months building feverishly in order to build up stage 0 to the point where it can actually support a launch of the Starship Super Heavy rocket. It's going to be a fun one to watch, that's for sure. I do think fairly straight away SpaceX is probably going to stick Starlink satellites in, on the rocket. I mean, at the end of the day, the nice thing about Starlink is the payload isn't that expensive. If it's $500,000 for a Starlink satellite and they launched 400, which I don't think they would anyway, I think it'd be more likely to be 300, but even at 400, you're only talking about $200 million worth of Starlink satellites, which is obviously a lot of money, but it's 200 million of their own money, and putting 400 satellites up in one go would be quite nifty. So I suspect that the very first payloads that Starship is going to carry to orbit will be their own internal Starlink satellites. Now, what's just happened? Why have we suddenly ground to a halt, I wonder? One thing I don't like, I mean, it's not obviously really Tesla's fault, it's just the nature of batteries, but on a cold morning like this, I forgot to preheat the car, so I preheated it enough to, make sure that I was warm getting into the car, but I didn't preheat it enough to actually get the battery in the vehicle warmed up. Oh yes, somebody's had a little incident here, I think. Yep, flat tire. The thing about Starlink is they can take risks with it, which they obviously wouldn't be able to do if they were launching hundreds of millions of dollars of a paying customers equipment. So yeah, I expect to see that. I expect to see Starlink on Starship in the relatively near future. And I think people forget how much of a sort of unknown is around Starship. Lots and lots of the bits that make that system up have never been used or tested by anyone else before, which is one of the reasons why It's so exciting to watch. Then, of course, they are going to be working on recovery. I actually think they'll probably stick Starlink satellites on board Starship before they have a successful recovery of both stages. I imagine that out of the two stages, if they could recover one or the other, I would imagine they would want to recover the booster as a matter of urgency, just because of the sheer number of engines on the bottom of that thing. I mean, the current prototype's got 29 and the eventual design calls for 33 engines, and these are multi-million-dollar engines apiece, so that represents a lot of investment. I do think their catching arm system is actually a very clever way of recovering both first and second stage, actually, because when you look at the way the ships come down, they're usually not pinpoint accurate. For example, if you look at some of the earlier crashes that the Starship prototype had as it was trying to sort of do its flip maneuver and land, one of them certainly was just a case of a hard landing where it was sort of more or less on target. It just came down too swiftly. And the nice thing about using catching arms is you can take some of that vertical velocity out of the catching by lowering the arms as the ship is settling down onto it. So you've got that sort of reduction in the actual velocity that the arms meet the ship or booster, and you can sort of, you know, move them around. I mean, if they can get the mechanics of the arm to work smoothly and efficiently, then I think it might actually work, which is just insane, because when you propose it on a piece of paper, I don't think you would find any other company or rocket engineer on planet Earth that thought, yeah, that's a good idea. It's brilliant. And, you know, but, you know, like I said, that's what makes it super exciting. So that's what I think we've got in store for the near term. Hopefully then they'll actually move on to some of the more stretch targets for this craft. Right, okay, I'm just here, I'm at my girlfriend's house, we're gonna go grab some lunch. Then I will talk about the medium term future and challenges that Starship's got to overcome. Just had a very yummy lunch. So obviously once we've got through the initial orbital launch test campaign and we've started launching some actual payloads, and hopefully we've actually managed to recover the booster and the Starship, so we're assuming that all that has gone fantastically well. That's great. That's only the beginning for this particular transport system. The next thing to do, once you've got that cheap, easy access to low Earth orbit, is work on the orbital refueling, and that's an absolutely critical part of the puzzle, because what that allows you to do is expand the envelope of where Starship can go from just low Earth orbit, because basically it gets to low Earth orbit with 100 tons in theory, and that 100 tons could be fuel, but 100 tons of fuel, if you've got a, you know, 200-300 ton dry mass vehicle, it's not going to carry you anywhere, really. You know, certainly nothing like enough fuel to get to the moon or anything. So you need to be able to refuel, and orbital refueling of a cryogenic propellant or propellants like liquid oxygen and liquid methane, that's not something that's ever been done before. It's never been demonstrated on scale in orbit ever. So there's a big question mark on that. But assuming that they can get that to work, it opens up the possibilities a huge amount. And this will be the very next thing they do once they've got the initial launching system relatively stable and reliable. And that's partly because of the $2.9 billion that NASA are giving SpaceX to develop a lunar variant Starship, which will only be able to get to the moon and land if it can be refueled. And that refueling will take many launches, somewhere between 6 and 12 probably, depending on payload and various other things. The reliability on the launch front is going to be quite an important part of the puzzle, and also the recovery, of course, because you don't want to have to build, you know, 10 odd Starships just to get one lunar Starship to the surface of the moon and back. It's going to really open up what can be done with low Earth orbit in terms of manufacturing, in terms of space stations, tourist hotels, you name it. I mean, the idea of an airliner to space is so compelling, and it's very difficult to actually say what the benefits and advantages will truly be, because they sound so fanciful. And part of the reason they sound so fanciful is because we just have never had a vehicle that can do that sort of job before. And one more nice little side benefit of Starship is because it is so massive, if you want a space station in low Earth orbit or a base on the moon, you can actually use a Starship as a starting point for it. It's got 1,000 cubic meters of space within the sort of cargo hold area. Basically got about the same internal volume as the entire International Space Station in just one launch. You know, you could launch a couple of them. You could put your space station in the ship and launch it that way if you wanted. I think probably for space stations in low Earth orbit, that's probably what they'll do. For a base on the moon, I think it actually makes sense just to take the Starship, land it on the moon, and then convert the whole thing into a great big space base. I think that would be freaking awesome. And then they could start working on, you know, making propellant at the moon, which would be cool too. And that would also make things much quicker and easier going further out into the solar system. Right, time to get back to lunch. Right, so next we're going to talk about the long-term Starship situation. There's a Nissan Leaf behind. I was trying to get behind him because, you know, I like to be behind electric cars as much as is possible, because that way my car isn't sucking in their dirty fumes. This is V.
Hey.
Thought I'd finish off today's video for the most part by talking about the long-term situation with Starship. Well, honestly, long-term, I don't actually think it's going to really be called Starship. I don't think it's going to be the craft that is currently being designed. It'll use all of the same techniques, all of the things that have worked on Starship will be on this new version of Starship, Starship 2.0, but it will be dramatically different to what we've seen so far. Starship is not so much about building the eventual vessel, it's more about trying to work out what sort of combination of techniques and technology will enable people to get to and from space in a fully reusable and critically rapidly fully reusable way. And that will have the ability to open up the whole solar system to us, especially if we can produce propellant on other celestial bodies, ones with slightly lower gravity than Earth. Like, obviously the moon is a prime candidate, although producing methane propellant is going to be tricky on the moon because there isn't that much carbon about, but there is water. Certainly on Mars there's plenty of CO2 and a reasonable amount of water, so producing, you know, all the propellant for a Starship on Mars would be relatively easy, and the amount of fuel required to get to orbit from Mars is a fraction of what's required on Earth. Through refueling, we should be able to get more or less anywhere. I mean, I don't think we'll be sending people out to the moons of Jupiter or Saturn anytime soon, but it would be nice to send a great big robotic mission with, you know, 100 tons worth of scientific equipment and rovers and drills and, you know, maybe a return capsule. I mean, you could stick an entire rocket in the, you know, payload bay of Starship so that you could return those samples to Earth. And in time, it'll be possible to actually send people out that way if it proves to be worth it. I'm very excited for this future because I think that one of the big questions will be more or less answered by that sort of exploration, and it's a question that I would really like to know the answer to. And if we don't get a move on, I won't live long enough to actually hear the answer. Are we alone in the universe? Now, I'm not expecting to find little grey men and flying saucers on the moons of Jupiter, but if we find that microbial life used to exist on Mars, or possibly still does, and then we find that it used to exist or still does under the ice of Europa, or, you know, one of the other moons of Saturn and Jupiter, then the fact that life will have started independently in 2 or 3 places just in our one solar system suggests that it will start more or less anywhere it can, given enough time. And if that's the case, then we can expect there to be many, many other planets out there with life, and a proportion of those will have complex life, and a proportion of those will have intelligent life. It will be more of a Star Trek scenario where advanced life is basically everywhere. You just got to find it amongst the vastness of space. Whereas if we go to all these places where life could exist and we don't find any hint that it has started at all, in particular on Mars, it suggests that perhaps, you know, we are relatively singular in our existence, which is itself, you know, an extremely interesting result. What about you, V? Do you want an interesting, exciting future?
It would be nice if you had like little robots that could go moon combing, essentially.
Moon combing robots. Wouldn't you rather do the moon combing yourself, though?
I would.
I would. I think that'd be awesome. Also, I quite fancy the idea of having a go in a low Earth gravity environment. That would be quite cool, like being able to do like backflips and stuff 20 feet up in the air. Well, not in the air, in the vacuum. So that's well worth the $2.9 billion that NASA's spending on getting back to the moon.
Very expensive backflips.
They are expensive backflips, yeah, absolutely. I think it moves humanity forwards, it really does. And it's so difficult to really understand how much of a critical thing Starship is, because we're talking about something that hasn't existed. It also makes it very difficult to predict, you know, when it will come to fruition. You know, Elon Musk has talked many times about how, oh yeah, we'll be going to Mars in, you know, a couple of years' time, and this was 5 years ago. You know, he's forever being over-optimistic. And part of the reason for that is because how do you know how big a job is when nobody on Earth has ever done that job before? Just look at the early development days of Starship. They had terrible trouble getting the tanks to hold pressure, you know, at a sensible level of thickness and weight. They seem to have got that problem nailed now, touch wood. Although I am looking forward to seeing a fully stacked, fully fueled Starship on the launch pad. That's going to be an exciting, you know, just to have it standing there full of propellant without crumpling and exploding will actually, I think, be quite an impressive feat, considering this thing is going to weigh thousands of tons when fueled. And it's going to be supported by essentially a 3.5 millimeter thick ring of steel with a 9 meter diameter. Yeah, it's going to be exciting. But yeah, apparently the maths works. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying it out. You know, they're doing that in January. I think they're going to have their launch license from the FAA and hopefully get the whole thing stacked and give it an orbital test flight. Which will be amazing. It'll be the most powerful rocket to have ever been launched from the surface of the Earth.
And that's
by a factor of 2. It's in January, assuming that the FAA give their approval. Fingers crossed they get through the environmental review without any trouble. Downloading dash cam footage. 10 minutes before I can go in the house? Right, I might have to just leave the car. Getting dark already. Oh, I need to go shove my head in a VR headset and pretend I'm on a beach in the Caribbean. I hope you've enjoyed today's video, found it fun and entertaining and hopefully interesting. If you have, remember to leave a like and share it and subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. The links are in the description. And a big thank you to my Patreon supporters, of course, because you guys are awesome. And I'll see you all in the next episode of my vlog. Bye. Firstly, hi everybody. Hey, no, I won't start like that.
Entering average speed check zone.
Yes, thank you.
I just realised you said that again.
What? And welcome to the outtake section of the video.